Here in Nigeria, where the government has indefinitely suspended the operations of microblogging service Twitter over what it described as a threat to national coexistence. Announcing the ban on Saturday, Information Minister Lai Mohammed said the social media platform was used persistently for activities that were capable of undermining Nigeria's corporate existence. Meanwhile, the social media giant remarked that it was investigating the Nigeria's government's announcement. On Wednesday, Twitter deleted a post by President Buhari, which it said violated its policy on abusive behavior. The action infuriated the presidency, eventually resulting into the current ban. Meanwhile, the Nigerian First Lady Aisha Buhari says in a latest tweet that she will be deactivating her Twitter account for now. As of midnight on Saturday, many Nigerian users observed that the platform had become inactive. And joining us to speak on the legal implications of this ban and what it portends for Nigerian populace is Dr. NNENNA IFEANYI AJUFO, a Nigerian lawyer and academic specializing in law and technology. Dr. NNENNA IFEANYI AJUFO is a senior lecturer as well of law and technology at the School of Law in Swansea University, the United Kingdom. Good afternoon, Dr. NNENNA. Good to have you on the program.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to join you to speak about this very fundamental issue. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I'm glad you used the word fundamental. Let me gauge your initial reaction to this fundamental issue.
Yes, absolutely embarrassing, absolutely unfortunate to say the least, that Nigeria would take such a position. You know, Nigeria is purportedly the giant of Africa, and we should rather set an example, particularly for other African states. And it's unfortunate that we rather poise ourselves to curtail digital rights. You know, blanket internet shutdowns, generic blocking, filtering of services are even considered by the United Nations as a violation of international human rights law. So what has happened for me in this age at a time when states in the international sphere are considering fundamental state responsibility in cyberspace, it's absolutely not acceptable. No state, absolutely no state has a right to take away the digital rights of its citizens. So I think that's the first basis to analyze this issue. Secondly, the question of national security. Unfortunately, states use national security as an alibi to, impinge on human rights. And this is one of those cases. Understandably, the state has a right to invoke national security for issues like this, but on the basis of necessity and proportionality. How necessary, how proportional is deletion of one person's tweet? The president is not above anyone in the country. The deletion of one person's tweet as against curtailing the rights of hundreds of millions of people. So necessity and proportionality must be weighed against public interest, overwhelming public interest. Now, Twitter has responsible behavior for secure and safe and peaceful internet. Remember, social media takedowns do not happen voluntarily by providers of social media services. They are usually reports. In this case, there was an overwhelming report from Nigerians about a tweet by their president. This is a move by citizens to hold their president accountable for a statement. Now, what the Minister of Information and Communications Technology is not considering is how that tweet, a simple tweet, can further tribal discordance in a tense nation like Nigeria. And so for me, Twitter was in a position to act legally at that point. ISP providers, social media providers can be responsible for defamatory activities, for illegal activities online, if they do not take action. And Twitter, I believe, was in that position. And this is the same thing that happened a few months back during the US elections. So we need to balance what we call national security in this situation so that it is not an alibi, it is not a veil to take away the rights of majority of people.
Very good, Dr. AJUFO. Now, in view of what you just said, obviously, apparently, this is quite reactionary on the part of the Nigerian government on that suspension. So how tenable are the reasons given by the Nigerian government in this regard to that suspension?
Absolutely not tenable for me. Now, what I would have expected for a responsible government, a government that realizes it is accountable for its citizens, is to do some PR damage. Maybe come out and say that the tweet was misunderstood. Nigerians have taken the tweet wrongly, but then you rather decide to ban services. Now, it is not tenable for me as well because, rights online are also tied to other rights. Civil and political rights are also tied to socioeconomic rights. We forget that Twitter is not only used as a medium for exchange of information. People rely on Twitter for socioeconomic rights. People rely on Twitter for buying and selling. People rely on Twitter for communication. People rely on Twitter for advertising and so many other issues. Now, just because there is a tweet, rather than looking for how, to de-escalate the situation, you decide to take away. Online abuses can also lead to offline abuses. So I do not see it as being tenable at a time like this. Considering the tension in the country, it is hardly the priority. It is hardly priority.
Now, Dr. NNENNA, let's go back to the very beginning, even before this actually happened. Evidently, the presidency were not amused with what Twitter did. So how do you think they should have actually handled it in the first instance?
Now, for me, it even started before then. In 2019, the president refused to give assent to the Digital Rights Bill. He cited cases of duplication of efforts. Then we started seeing some occurrences. The NSAS movement happened, and then there were comments about Twitter. There is no way to say we can handle this. A democratically elected government must be open to accountability, transparency of its citizens. I do not see an overwhelming infringement. I do not see an overwhelming situation of public interest or national security here. So in terms of saying handling it's a challenge for me because I do not see at any instance where social media has been a situation that impinges on national security in Nigeria. Social media has always been an avenue for citizens to hold governments accountable. And if in this age, a government is not ready, any state has a problem with its citizens exercising their freedom of information and is obviously refusing to be held accountable, the government has a problem with openness and transparency and accountability to its citizens. So in this way, I think if a government feels social media is being used wrongly, there are other avenues. Awareness, education. Sometimes the general populace may not even see the adverse effects of how social media affects other aspects of rights, maybe like fake news, misinformation, and all of that. There are other avenues, for example, education, raising awareness, but simply blocking access to Twitter would never balance the situation in Nigeria now.
Indeed, Dr. AJUFO, now there's a global discuss to regulate the activities of online media platforms, as you would have in mainstream media as well. Do you think this scenario is also applicable here?
Possibly, but that is where I talked about proportionality and necessity. I am not saying that online media providers or social media cannot be seen in a position, that furthers arbitrary activities, obnoxious activities. However, there should always be that balance. That is my point. There are moves like that, but at the same time, the overwhelming position at the international sphere is that states, digital technologies provide means to advocate, defend, and exercise human rights, but that they should not also be used to suppress, limit, and violate human rights. So we must find a balance. Yes, it's a good approach because they also can be liable for misinformation, defamatory content. Blogs like Twitter can also be in position to fuel crisis. However, let's be sincere with these scenarios and the extent of the results or the ripple effect of those scenarios where they have not posed problems. For example, a state during election, you bar internet access because of elections and you cite national security. You curtail people's rights to freedom of communication, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. It is rather prima facie proof of disregards of your citizen, and it shows censorship. Censorship should be disregarded. Censorship should not be a place in this age where people rely on the internet as a source of livelihood.
Now, given all that you said, what are the repercussions that the nation is likely to face, and even Nigerians, as a result of this recent development?
Absolutely. What Nigeria fails to understand is that such a move simply represents them as a dictatorial government, which blatantly disregards the realization and promotion of human rights of its citizens in this age. This is just coming few days after the UNGGE, the United Nations Group of Governmental Experts, released the 2021 report re-emphasizing the responsibility of states towards human rights. All over, there have been conversations about norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace. I worry that the position of Nigeria in Africa, it would, portray us badly. I also worry that this will also take away the rights of Nigerians, not just this right of freedom of information, we keep talking about, or freedom of expression, but also other rights. That right is not just tied to freedom of information, but also socioeconomic rights. And like I said, online violations can even lead to offline abuses. Imagine where Twitter has saved so many people who were subject to police abuses, or a lady who is, facing a threat, a woman who is facing a threat or a rape case and tweets about it. It could save a life. Now you take away that instant communication and it could be tied back to other rights as well. So if governments feel bad or feel upset about being called out for wrongdoing, we should be careful how it represents us in the international scene as well.
Indeed, Dr. AJUFO. Now, there's possibilities of finding loopholes in Nigeria's Twitter suspension. There's been talks on the social media about the VPN option, and this also puts paid to the issue of Nigeria's capacity to actually enforce that suspension. What are your thoughts there?
Absolutely. We need to, and this is why a lot of people find it quite ridiculous, because we need to talk about digital capacity. We need to talk about we need to talk about infrastructure as well. Now, why should we even be having the discussion where people are now seeking private VPNs to allow them have access? It is totally just unacceptable. Now, we must talk about digital capacity to even enforce, or else you ridicule yourself when you imagine you report on Twitter, you're suspending Twitter activities and all of this. I think it just makes a mockery of the entire situation. We need to go back as Nigeria. This is an age where the African Union has released a digital transformation strategy. Nigeria should be championing such cause. If we are rather worried about situations that will affect security, Nigeria should, for example, ratify the Malabo Convention on Cybersecurity and Data Protection. Nigeria has failed to ratify, even after constant calls to ratify that convention. That would rather be an avenue to save the situation. We will lead the conversation. This year, they released the National Cybersecurity Strategies. If we have policies in place, why are we worried about how to tackle, these situations in other very amusing avenues? Absolutely.
Okay, just very briefly before we let you go, I was going to ask you regarding the legal rights that Twitter actually had in terms of carrying out this recent suspension. So, you being a lawyer, perhaps you'll be able to sort of shed more light on the legal aspects of what they have done.
Absolutely. Twitter has terms and conditions. When you sign on to social media platforms, there are explicit terms and conditions which we are always very weary of reading. And a community like that, we should realize that rights may not always be absolute. You signed on freely. And if there are conditions, you must abide to those conditions. And like I said, we are all agents of justice. ISP providers, social media platforms also have responsible behavior for secure and peaceful cyberspace. So absolutely, as long as social media platforms like Twitter are not going overboard or going ultra-vires their rights or their place in terms of terms and conditions, and they are absolutely clear.
And on
Facebook
that note, that's as much as we can take. I'm sorry, Dr. NNENNA IFEANYI AJUFO, of a lecturer at the University of in Swansea in the UK. I'd like to thank you for your thoughts on those issues.